A frankly shocking morning here at the Ottawa courthouse as day 2 of the sentencing hearing of Convoy leader Pat King underway, with the Crown finally putting it on the record that they are asking for 10 years. And get this, the Crown said that that was a restrained, on their behalf, but significant request. They said they calculated 14 years, but they could have given 26 with all the charges together. It's absolutely mind-blowing what's happening right now in those walls. It's hard to believe. And the arguments being made are bad. The judge is frequently saying, the judge came out quite early into the Crown spiel this morning and said, I don't see how this is a maximum sentence scenario. And the Crown went on and on and on and on. And when he thought they're done, back again, circling more than I do in my videos. Over and over again, it was actually, they described, of course, back to trial issues, the sound of horns, the pollution, and all this other stuff. But they tried to bring up case law. They said, well, when you look at it, it's not about parity. The Supreme Court in such and such decision said parity is a lesser consideration. The main is the gravity of the offense, the seriousness of the offense, and the seriousness of the offender. In that context, those are the priorities that should be considered for sentencing. Then there's the issue of the denunciation. Denouncing the person as the sentencing acts as the public's condemnation of the action, and then deterrence from future people thinking they could do that. I talked about this a little bit in my video a short time ago about how I was worried about the talk of Convoy 60.0 could cause this, and that was part of the argument again today. But the main was the denunciation, that it's not acceptable in our society. But the way that the Crown phrased this, frankly, I feel, and this is my opinion, throw me in jail for it, was an attack on the justice system. I feel like this was so far out of line as to be unacceptable. We're talking about what is the limit of what's acceptable in society. And he talked a lot about can't compare to this, can't compare to that, can't look at this case, can't look at that case. The Crown spent a lot of time saying, look at this offender in Convoy, convicted, charged in mischief, look at what they got. But now we're at the sentencing stage. We look at people like Marco van Hugenbos in Alberta, sentenced to 4 months for mischief. And now the Crown doesn't want to touch that with a 6,000-foot pole. And we talk about a case, the Crown brings up a case of a pig farm protest with 50 protesters that lasted 2 hours, and it took 6 hours to arrest everyone. And in that case, the person was given 30 days jail, but there might have been some disagreement about that. Apparently it was before conditional sentences were, this case was before conditional sentencing. And in this circumstance, it's possible that it was to appeal. The appeal was granted, and they were given, I think, 120 days conditional sentence in the community. But the Crown says that this particular case in the Ottawa Freedom Convoy, occupation, 100 times over. It's every other word, but just the arguments themselves are what's so insidious here and so mind-breaking. And certainly the judge is not on side with all of it. It's just basically, like I said, came out and flat out said, I don't see how this is a maximum scenario, because we have the moral culpability. How does this do that? And the Crown seems to have no problem comparing things when it's in favor to them, but when it's not in favor to them, don't do that, right? So the Crown's saying, oh, there's no precedence for this case. This case is 1,000 times worse than the pig farm protest, where the protesters got 30 days sentence or whatever. 1,000 times more in this case. It's 10 years. Again, a significant but restrained request from the gracious Crown. I honestly, this is my opinion. This is still a democracy. Okay, thank you, whoever's watching this, whoever you are. This is still a democracy. I'm allowed to express that. I believe this was an attack on the justice system. I believe that's how far this went today in there, as to be an attack on the system of justice, to present this case in this way, to ask for this maximum sentence, to not allow the comparison. So the judge is basically like at one point, so you're asking me not to compare the other Convoy cases now, because this is a leader, you say it's unprecedented, there's no comparison, there's no parallel, there's no parity, and also because of the principle of the Supreme Court saying the significance of the offense and the offender as above parity and considerations. And he's like, no, it doesn't work like that. He's like, well, I'm going to consider everything. And he's like, oh, well, Marco van Hugenbos, the Crown says, in Coots is not a leader, was not a leader. The court said they couldn't prove he was a leader. Here we have King's a leader. But then again, trying to time into all this, the community victim impact statement the Crown tendered yesterday from the witness tendered from the Crown, saying that there was these, whatever, they were afraid, they felt like hostages in the building, there was honking, there was someone suffered a mental health crisis, had to go to the hospital, all this stuff, trying to connect that to King. That's okay, but it just never ends. And the Crown's saying that the lack of an aggravating factor is not a mitigating factor, so somehow that means send him to jail for 10 years. It doesn't make sense, folks. None of this makes sense. When you look at it, and I took extensive notes in there trying to transcribe this. It was moving fast. At times it was, frankly, it was heated, but respectful. But I find it to be an affront to justice. I find it an affront to our democracy. Basically, the Crown is saying that there needs to be a message sent here that people don't decide in the future to come and protest in Ottawa and to come have a convoy and try to change the democratically elected government. That's exactly the policy. That's exactly the purpose of a protest. As the judge pointed out, you can have a protest that gets out of control. As he said, he made findings here. That's where we are. But to say that it's serious, but to say it's at the maximum 10 years, and then the Crown goes on and says, well. The courts have said that the appeals courts have said, and the Supreme Court said, when you look at the seriousness of an offense, the way to judge the seriousness of an offense is to look at the maximum mischief. 10 years, sexual assault, 10 years, assault causing bodily harm, 10 years. Frankly, and then the judge would say things like, well, to King's credit, every time he would come on a broadcast, he would say, remain peaceful, don't do violence. And then the Crown would come back and say, the absence of violence does not make it peaceful. Okay, she's like, certainly not being able to get a restful night's sleep is described as something that's not peaceful. So therefore send them to 10 years. The Crown couldn't even take one person. All right, let me put it to you this way, folks, and this is a matter of the facts that have been found. The Crown couldn't take one person and say, Mr. King's words and actions led to this person doing that crime. That's why he was charged and convicted of counseling mischief not committed. Counseling obstruct not committed. Counseling disobey court order, not committed, because the Crown couldn't say one person did what they did because of what King said, or him going on social media. This is an attack on our system of justice here in this country. It is ridiculous, folks, and it is making my brain is hurting from the arguments being made in there and the jumps and the leaps in logic. The defense captured it quite well. When she finally had her turn to come up right before lunch, and she come up and she said, 80% of what you just heard is, if you were to follow it, would be an error in law and appealable, and it's rhetoric. And then she brought up the case. She used a bit of rhetoric herself, and she said, this morning, the former, I forget his name, Novlitsky, the former opposition leader in Russia, who's serving 19 years in jail right now, his lawyers today were convicted of 3 years. He's like, this is Canada, this is not Russia. The fact that Mr. King you want him to get 10 years, saying to my friend wants him to get 10 years, is chilling. This is Canada. This would make him a political prisoner if he did get 10 years. Guys, we're looking at people who harm people in grievous ways, direct victims. Everything all right there, Chris?
Yeah.
Direct victims. And they get slaps on the wrist, they get a year or two, and the Crown has the tenacity to say this needs to be 10 years. They're saying, the finding of fact, $30 million of city, but again, the Crown can't find a single person who can actually concretely, they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt, acted on Mr. King's words, throw him in jail for 10 years. It is ridiculous. This case was tried on the basis of Mr. King's social media posts and him saying stuff. And the judge even alluded to that a little bit, saying, well, we're watching King, we're seeing his statements. The Crown brought up the fact that Tamara Leach wanted to move trucks out, and Pat apparently said, oh, don't do that, we would never do that, don't move out of the residential areas. And then the judge pointed out that at the end of that, he said, well, also, let's leave town and regroup or something, and nobody did it. So he's speaking to an audience. It's a big audience. We don't know who they are, is what the judge says. And then we took from that, we got a conviction of counseling an offense not committed multiple times, and then of course his direct conviction of mischief. So that's where we are at with this. But the arguments themselves are just so contradictory and hypocritical. It's okay for the Crown to bring up all these different offenders during the course of the trial, but when it comes to sentencing, because maybe they got house arrest, maybe they got, I can't think of anyone in Ottawa who got jail so far. The only person I can think of is Jay Vanderweer, who got 45 days of house arrest and 45 days of curfew so far. To my knowledge, I think that's the most severe punishment that's been doled out. He had a truck right at Metcalfe and Wellington. So now the Crown's looking at this and they're saying, no. Don't look at the sentence. We used this all in the trial, mischief, blah, blah, blah. Don't look at that. Now we're going to impose a severe sentence because mischief has a maximum sentence of 10 years, and you're not supposed to look at parity, and you have you're supposed to look at the severity of the offense and the severity of the offender, and blah, 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 give him 10 years. And the judge, again, like I keep saying, hasn't really he said it directly in the court, the judge. He said, I'm not convinced that this is the highest end of moral culpability. He's like, well, what did he intend to do? The Crown said he intended to come to Ottawa to start the occupation. Then there was a rift with the leadership at some point in Ottawa, but it doesn't matter. He intended millions of trucks. He snuck trucks up on Kent, do this, do that. Still, it's ridiculous. Then they talk about, the Crown's like, well, don't compare different elements of the offense. When the Crown's language in the sentencing hearing this morning sounded to me like intimidation, like the words from intimidation. They basically kept saying he was convicted of mischief and disobey court order and counsel obstruct police not committed. I believe those are the breadth of the convictions. There's 5 in total, but that's the breadth of the conviction type. all of the intimidation charges he was acquitted of. Yet in the Crown's language this morning, what am I hearing? I am hearing the sounds, which basically sounds like a copy and paste from the criminal code on intimidation. They came to Ottawa to harass the citizens, to make the political change, to threaten and force the political change. That's a crime he wasn't convicted. He was acquitted of that, of intimidation. So you're going to take the mischief, the lawful interference with the lawful use of enjoyment of property, you're going to stretch it to intimidation, you're going to stretch it to sedition, because the elements of where you started, the Crown talked on and on and on about attacking the democratically elected government. He wasn't charged with sedition. He certainly wasn't convicted of it. You can't bring it up now. You can't put it in your language and turn mischief into something it's not. Well, saying that you can't compare X to Y, apples to oranges, when you're doing the same damn thing with things that haven't been proven in court of law or things that were acquitted in the court of law. Let's get real here. Let's get real. This is out of control. Now, thankfully, the Crown is done. And like I said, those arguments, you got to go and read my Twitter thread, guys, at RightBlend. Go and read through the transcript today, because this stuff is going to blow your mind. You need to see this. This is done for now. Now the defense gets to make their submissions. Then the Crown piped up at the end there, right before lunch break, and said, and we'll try to keep our response to anything the defense says to 10 minutes. Watch, we'll be in here for an hour, and this will be here to 5:30, no matter. But it's to run out the clock. It's to make us tired. It's just insufferable. Attack on democracy to come and protest? Come on. To try and affect change? Oh, come carry a sign is what he said at Wellington, but don't ever do anything like that. So I asked, what about the people, the unvaccinated Canadians in our country who were tortured by our government for not taking a shot? And what would have happened to me if I had done that and I had suffered a mortal injury or a serious life-altering injury like so many documented people have and have been neglected? They're fighting for compensation, for support. They're in a wheelchair. They don't have no support. Who would have been there for me? Not you, certainly. Who's responsible for that? Who's responsible for crushing our businesses, our families, our friendships, our social fabric in this country? Who's responsible for that? You want Mr. King to go to jail for 10 years? How much is Justin going to get? 2,000? That's what he deserves. 2,000 years. You want to go by that? You say that the protest here in Ottawa is 1,000 times worse than the pig farm protest? What the government of Canada did to us was 10,000 times worse than whatever the fuck happened in Ottawa. So one of these people getting on trial, like the Crown talked about, oh, the police and the city aren't responsible, the private citizens, they had to do this. And the judge was like, well, you know what? Nobody tried to get a contempt order from court. Nobody tried to do this, nobody tried to do that. And the Crown's like, well, the city and the Crown and the Ottawa police are not on trial. When are there going to be trials for real accountability in this country? We get Pat King loud and boisterous. These decisions that were made against the citizens of Canada were made without a scientific background, and they were made of a pseudo-religious belief, and people were persecuted and subjugated and separated because of it, and it did irreparable, immeasurable harm. Not sleepless nights for 2 or 3 weeks, but lost lives, untold physical and health damages, missed screenings for routine medical issues that cause the loss of life that we cannot calculate properly. Who's accountable for that? I cannot believe this. It's okay for them to compare to Coots. It's okay for them to bring up this charge. It's okay for them to stitch language from other offenses that were acquitted or not laid into mischief to try to make it something it's not. But don't look at what Marco van Hugenbos got. Don't look at what whatever got. Give him 10 years. That's a restrained and a severe time, but we calculated 14 and he could have got 26, so it's reasonable. It's reasonable, folks. Watch the thread. Thank you for watching. And from Ottawa, I'm RightBlend. Who's behind the camera?
Daisy here.
It's finally here. All the arguments are said and done. Pat King will face his sentencing on February 7th in the morning. The Justice has heard all the arguments from all the sides, and he will deliver his verdict into the fate of Pat King and what punishment he will get for his 5 convictions. I spoke extensively over the lunch video about what happened and what the Crown was arguing, and that basically covered the most ridiculous portions of the day. But however, I also want to mention a comparison that the Crown made. They were comparing convoy activities to pro-Palestinian protesters occupying Jewish neighborhoods in Toronto, or one particular pro-Palestinian protester who brought gasoline to the 4th floor of a hospital. And this comparison again was made in circles several times. And at one point the judge said, what does Convoy have to do with people targeting an ethnic neighborhood, there may have been examples of something, but that's not what the convoy was doing. They were there to argue against mandates and against government policy. They weren't there to target ethnic groups. That's not what's happening at Convoy. That is comparing apples to oranges. As the Crown liked to say earlier today, comparing this case to that case, comparing Coutts to Ottawa, apples and oranges. Well, the judge turned it back around and said, well, that's comparing apples and oranges by comparison pro-Palestinian protesters going to an ethnically Jewish neighborhood versus people coming to Ottawa to express their discontent with the government, a disagreement. Now, the judge said a lot of things like, okay, this is a protest that got out of control. The Crown this was an occupation intended to harm citizens of Ottawa from the beginning. I don't think a lot of the Crown's, or even most of the Crown's arguments landed. Now, the Crown did make comments about if this ends up in appellate court, so forward, so such. And the thing about that is it would have to go to the Ontario Court of Appeal, as this is being tried in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. So the next court up would be the Ontario Court of Appeal. That's where we're at with this. I don't know if it is going to go there. I don't anticipate a 10-year sentence. The judge basically said as much, that he can't see how the Crown is trying to, I explained in my earlier video how the Crown got to the maximum, and the Crown was basically saying a lack of an aggravating factor isn't a mitigating factor. You got to look at the severity of the case and the severity of the offender, and you don't need the worst offender and the worst offense to get the maximum and all this and all that. I don't think they landed. They really didn't. Their comparisons didn't make sense. They didn't understand some of the basic fundamental arguments the defense was making. At one point, when the Crown had their reply to the defense's arguments that happened from after the lunch break to just about an hour before we break, it was a late day it was 5 p.m. because Pat King actually spoke, and I'll summarize a bit of that. But before that point, when the Crown was in reply, they were arguing about a misunderstanding. They thought that the defense had said Pat King is an amputee, so he shouldn't get a harsher sentence. But what they really actually said, and the judge eventually did correct them, is his understanding was the defense was saying, if Pat King gets a conditional sentence, please don't give him an electronic monitoring device because it's difficult. He only has one leg, and it's hard to balance that with that. So then the judge clarified, if I do impose a conditional sentence, I make the conditions of that so I can choose whether or not to have that monitoring device on. And the Crown's like, oh, I'm sorry, we thought, they were arguing about not getting a harsher penalty because he's got a disability when he could get care in penitentiary. And the Crown maintained the position that if Mr. King was not to receive the most severe possible penitentiary sentence, it would set basically a stamp of approval for anyone to come to Ottawa and to do that. And then he brought up again the pro-Palestinians, the gasoline on the 4th floor of the hospital, again, never happened during Convoy. Nobody tried to burn anything down in Convoy, as much as some in the fake news said they did. That never happened. Or the other instances of targeting ethnically Jewish neighborhoods, that never happened in Convoy. Very different, as the judge said and pointed out, that would be illegal under multiple steps in the criminal code, as opposed to this. And then the defense was good. The defense made all the same points, but mostly the Crown made the points for them. When they were arguing this morning with their illogical, contradictory, hypocritical arguments that didn't make any sense, they made the point for this. They were trying to take bits and pieces of different things that Mr. King was not charged nor convicted of. For example, not charged with sedition, taking bits of that, attacking the democratic process, going from a mischief conviction to attacking the democratic process. They never laid a charge of sedition, never mind even convicting him of that. And then they borrow language from intimidation and put that to this, even though he was acquitted of intimidation, and saying, lack of violence isn't a peace, not being able to sleep well is not peaceful. And it went on and on. So the defense basically just tied a bow. I think Miss Calvino did fantastic. She did really well. Guys, I know I'm a bit tired right now. This has been a long process to produce these videos and cover these notes, so thank you very much. If you've appreciated the coverage, please consider supporting my work by sending an Interact e-transfer to realrightblend@gmail.com. That address again is real, like the real, this is real life, realrightblend@gmail.com. Any support's appreciated. The likes, the comments, the shares. This has been the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life, covering these trials, but also I think the most important thing I've ever done. And I couldn't have done it without the help of Chris Dacey. He's helped me bounce ideas off of him. He's a steadfast stickman, holding the camera steady all the way through, putting up with this. We're in the freezing cold right now. It's late. We want to go home. We're tired. It's been a long day. A lot of stuff happened. Somebody got thrown out of court during the defense's spiel by basically saying, or I don't remember if it was the Crown or defense, but some lady I've never seen really jumped up and said, I'm the leader. If he's the leader, I'm the leader. And I think she was in support of Pat, but she got ejected from the court, and I think ultimately arrested because I think she continued to escalate.
She was
I don't
arrested.
know who she was. Just sidetracks like that, but I think Mr. King and his defense did very well. I think the Crown absolutely floundered And like the judge said, I recognize, Mr. Crown, that you're obligated to speak on behalf of the citizens of Ottawa, and you've done so forcefully. Thank you for your submissions. And eventually, there were points where the judge was like, the Crown would keep repeating and repeating something, and eventually the judge was like, listen, this isn't helpful. We've said this about 15 times. I'm paraphrasing here, this is not exactly, but I'll go through the submissions, I'll make it, but if you have another point, please get to that one, because we're going around here. And I think the Crown realizes that they're not going to get that 10-year. They're not going to get the 5 years. I would be surprised if they got more than time served at this point, because they flopped so hard. And I think Natasha did great, and I think the Crown did so poorly. And the Crown kept saying, well, you got to consider the severity of the offense, you got to consider all these different angles. But what the Crown didn't say is, well, you also have to consider the facts of the case as they are. And when you look at the facts of the case as they are, we don't have ethnically targeting of neighborhoods, we don't have targeting minorities, we don't have violence, we don't have threatening. And to King's credit, as the judge has noted, he's always telling people to be peaceful. It was mischievous interference with the lawful use and enjoyment of property. But we don't have attacking here. We don't have people who came to Ottawa to attack or hurt people. We have, as many are of the opinion of myself included, but maybe even less so than this. My opinion is a little bit more even lenient than this, that it was a protest that got out of hand. The Crown is occupation coming day one to hurt everybody. It's all over the place. And then again, King is convicted of counseling offenses for offenses not committed, which again, as I explained in my earlier video, the Crown hasn't taken anybody and said, Mr. King's words led to that person doing that thing, and drawn a connection and proven that beyond a reasonable doubt. So when they're trying to say, look at this impact statement of the community of the women's shelter, look at the things they were scared of, and then trying to tie that into King and throw him under the bus for 10 years because of that, and then at the same time claiming that they're being restrained in asking for 10 years when they calculated 14 and it could have been 26 with the maximum. The defense made points about concurrent versus consecutive sentencing. The defense made points about how, no, it's not true that it would still send a message to people. If Pat King got time served in 3 years probation, they would know, listen, you can't just come and do this. If you cross a line, there is a red line, you will be punished. And even Mr. King. So there's a lot more to it, guys. You could go through it. I think, again, Natasha, there's less to talk about because it wasn't as much as a clown show. I'm sorry, it was just good legalese. It was good lawyering. So there's not very much that points out. It was just a counterpoint to everything the Crown raised, but the Crown destroyed most of their own points. If you want all the details, you can go on my X and see the transcriptions that I produce every day on my X account at Rightblend and see the amount of detail and stuff. I don't get every single exchange. I have to do ... because I'll skip a couple sentences. I'll miss it, I'll be behind. But it's pretty complete. It's a pretty fulsome picture. Wouldn't you say, Chris?
Yeah, I would say it's about the most detailed look at this thing that you could possibly get without being here, or even more so.
Transcriptions cost a lot of money, by the way, in the court world. If you ever need a transcription, it's like a couple $100 per page. Now, mine is not of the accuracy of those professionally certified ones. They have better typing skills than I do and more prime. But at the same time, I think it's a pretty good service to the public to provide this.
Can we touch on Pat did speak for him on his own behalf there?
What time are we at?
We're at 9 minutes.
A really important addendum is there were several rather heated exchanges between the Crown and the judge today. Now, the judge gave the Crown plenty of time to rant and rave and lecture and go in circles. But at one point, on the re-examination, or whatever you want to call it, the response to the defense's submissions, which was right before King spoke, the Crown described the judge's findings as saying that there was thuggery and extortion, and the judge basically said, I did not say that. Don't put those words in my mouth. And then the Crown kept trying to push it, and the judge is like, let's move on from this. And there was a few examples of these kind of terse moments throughout the day. Terse, is that a word? Tense. But there was a few examples of this happening throughout the day, of the Crown circling a point or saying something that was not necessarily true, or that definitely wasn't landing, and then eventually the judge would be like, can you make your point, because we have to get to the defense at some point, and giving, mind you, the Crown plenty of time. But it was a very notable moment. Don't tell me what I said. I didn't say that. This is a protest that started off one way, got out of hand. There was some criminal lines crossed, mischief was found. But then me saying, you can't go and piecemeal everything together. And then there was the point when the defense, during their submission, said that the Crown misrepresented to the court their perspective on the Alberta Coutts Van Hugenbos conviction by saying Mr. Van Hugenbos wasn't found to be a leader by the court. The Crown, in their reply, or even maybe on interruption, said, no, we never said that. But and the judge pointed out, well, as I understood it in your oral submissions, you did say that. Maybe what the defense is saying is a mischaracterization, maybe not a personal insult to you, Mr. Crown, but you did say he wasn't a leader, and then there was talk about getting the actual decision as it happened last Friday to try and parse through that and put that into perspective. But then the Crown played that off by saying in their written submissions that Mr. Van Hugenbos was found to be a leader for some time, a short amount of time, whatever. They're trying everything they can. And during the trial, they were like, okay, look at this case, this person found guilty of mischief, this one. But now we're on sentencing. They're asking for the maximum, this ridiculous amount of time. This anti-democratic sentence is what the Crown is asking for. And now they don't want the court to look at the other sentences to see, oh, Marco Van Hugenbos, leader in Coutts, or whatever he was, gives speech, liaise with media, sometimes with police, whatever that is, for this extended protest at the Coutts border, and he gets 4 months. The Crown doesn't want you looking at that. Sorry, I'm going to keep you holding on a little bit longer. So Pat did speak, and he talked about how the experience has changed and in some ways ruined his life. He talked about the experience in OCDC, how he was he was roommates with a murderer, a double homicide allegation of a murderer, and he was afraid every night of going to sleep because he was afraid he would be in his sleep. He talked about being in isolation for many days, which with the lights on 24/7, no sleep. The guards would come in the middle of the night. They'd make fun of him. They'd harass him. There would be people, maybe allegations of people getting together to try and attack or target him, of not receiving proper medical care, how he would scream because his amputated leg would be getting such nasty infections, and he would scream and beg for medical care. But finally, it took many times for someone to advocate for him to get it, because it almost got to the point, I think he said, of sepsis or something so quite severe, or staph infection, and finally he was taken to the infirmary, so he's not getting the care. And then he talked about using the shower, how with his metal amputated leg, like if he's in a shower and he's standing in a shower, he's gonna slip and fall and hurt himself, so he needed a bench, and it took forever to get that. So he was not accommodated as people with disabilities have the legal right to be in our country. Okay, so that's the treatment he's getting, and just regular treatment for people in there is not a fun time. The judge made a comment that he because this Pulowski clip that the Crown played yesterday, basically saying, King talking about people protesting outside the jail. Oh, if you're protesting outside the jail, please don't harass the jail staff. They have to go home to their life, to their lives. And the judge said he was impressed by that. It showed some awareness, basically, is to paraphrase the judge. There was other parts in there where he seemed, gung-ho, but we got a right to believe what we do about the actions, even if we're wrong in them, like the judge said. He has a right to believe in what he does about what happened, and the rest is for him to draw. But we can't take people's thoughts away. That's my insertion there. That's it. King, he laid his heart out. He talked about how it made him miss his son's graduation. His son's very smart, was able to go to aerospace engineering into Tokyo University, and was not able to do that because of Mr. King's money that he had saved for tuition for his son not being frozen. So he couldn't provide that for his son, so he was unable to do that opportunity. And he wasn't able to attend his son's high school graduation, which was a devastating impact on his relationship with his son. And he broke down, he was in tears for the whole statement. I've posted my best version of the statement on my Facebook and X account so you can read it. And if you're on YouTube, I'm going to post it in the comments. He was sincere. He's like, I'm sorry to the people of Ottawa. Our intention was not to hurt you. It was to talk to everything okay?
Yeah, fly, low battery.
It was to talk to the government, and it never happened. I think I'll end it there, guys, because this has been a really long process. I am tired. Thank you so much for following. This has been the most important thing that I've ever done in my life. It's been the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life, and I appreciate each and every one of you following along. And I will be here on the 7th to report, and for Tamara Leach and Chris Barber in March. Thank you, guys. Have a great night.
Thank you.